So it's kind of bizarre today because I had a really interesting encounter today, but it also really worries me as well because the coronavirus, we just haven't got it under control in this country. That's a fact, well and truly. And it seems to me, especially this week and next week, a lot of people for the first time are going to be going back to work, or their businesses have now insisted that they go back to work in the office. And now we put an end to all this working from home malarkey. Which I think is going to be very hard for some businesses to try and do, because a lot of businesses have been making excuses for years. Oh, you can't work from home. Well, a lot of people have been doing it for the past 5 months very, very easily and very successfully. So, but that's another video. But there's a guy who I've been meeting on my walks. You know, you just pass each other on the regular. We just see each other, we say hi. It's turned into like a bit of a just an informal chat. I don't know if he lives by himself, so I could be like one of the only few people he's seen physically over lockdown period. I don't know. But interestingly enough, today, when I saw him taking him for his dogs to walk, he's in his work suit and he's going back to work for the first time. And this really, really does worry me because, as I said at the beginning, we haven't got the coronavirus under any way, shape or form of control. So it worries me, the fact that you've now got people and businesses insisting, oh, you need to come back to work, that in a couple of weeks there's going to be a spike, even in more numbers. Because our government has just failed to get it under any way, shape, way or form of control at all. Not only that, we know that because this is the coronavirus itself is like a novel flu virus, so it's very much more active during obviously winter times, and obviously that's not too far off now. So there is a second wave coming. I'm not a betting man, but you know what? I'd say the odds for a second wave happening at this moment in time are probably something like 60-40, something like that. And it could be even higher. I'm pretty sure the other people that would probably argue, I wouldn't disagree with them, there's like 70-75% chance of it happening. I wouldn't disagree with someone who said that, to be honest, but there you go. And it's not only people like me who are worrying. Turns out our people in charge are also starting to worry, especially old Boris Johnson, because you may remember a couple of weeks ago, Johnson was praying for a Christmas recovery, and then it will all be over by Christmas. The old World War I line. It'll all be over by Christmas. None of the experts are saying that. Only Boris Johnson is, and hoping and praying. Remember, the coronavirus has taken 20% of this country's GDP. That's 2 decades of growth. And to be honest, the last decade has pretty much been a slow growth because of the austerity programs that have been implemented and have made things 10 times worse for the ordinary working people of this country. So, is it any wonder that Boris Johnson is suddenly worried about a second wave? So before we get into today's article, please do like and share this video. It does help out the channel. And below are links to Patreon and another one to a one-off donation link if you would like to support the channel in that way. So let's get into it, shall we? So, why Boris Johnson is suddenly spooked by the spectre of a second spike. A few weeks ago, a group of civil servants at the Cabinet Office were tasked with what you might consider the impossible mission. The officials were told to find a way of reopening nightclubs in a coronavirus-safe way. A bright group, they reported back with some ideas, but each concluded with the fundamental problem at the heart of this exercise. The socially distanced nightclub is a contradictory in terms. Nightclubs, by their very nature, are all about social intimacy. I relate to this story to illustrate just how very desperate the government has been to release Britain from every aspect of lockdown and return us to something that resembles the pre-coronavirus world as closely as possible. They dreamed of returning it to that pre-Caesarean age in which you could eat out with your family, go drinking with your mates, commute to work, celebrate a religious festival, or jet off to holiday somewhere reliably sunny without having to worry about catching or spreading a deadly disease. While never quite saying it explicitly, their ambition has essentially been to get everything open again. This has been driven by a treasury so frantic to get the economy on its feet that it is offering tax-funded bribes to get people go out into eateries over August. This is combined with a Downing Street disastrous to create the impression that the crisis is subsiding, not in the least in the hope that this would blunt the memories of any blunders it committed in the opening phases of the epidemic. The opening began somewhat tentatively and experimentally at first. The Prime Minister generally adhered to the Council of Number 10 scientific advisers that it would be perilous to rush lifting of restrictions when the effects of the easing were not wholly predictable. The initial steps were too slow for many Tory MPs, who, for the while, could be heard muttering that Mr. Johnson's self-described mugging by the virus had left him scared and overcautious. The idea that we have a Prime Minister who averts on the side of caution was something very compatible with everything else we know about his personality, and the theory looks even less convincing today. Sports fixtures are still being played to empty stands, but the progressive relaxation of controls means that much of else has become allowable again. Shops, pubs, restaurants, beauty salons and hairdressers reopened their doors, as did stately homes, cinemas, playgrounds and beaches, to reinforce the notion that the worst was over. The Prime Minister cancelled the daily Number 10's conference, sending a false flag signal that the crisis had passed. The emergency news conference that was hastily arranged on Friday in response to a worrying sign of resurgence of infection was the first in many weeks. The most telling illustration of Mr. Johnson's yearning for the crisis to go away came when he broke with the scientists by abruptly changing the government's advice on travelling to work. In mid-July, he declared that the injunction to stay at home if you can was being replaced to go to work if you can. Mr. Johnson further declared a desire to see bustle return to high streets. The British economy and many of its jobs are precariously dependent on what is called social consumption: eating, drinking, shopping, travelling and leisure. Put crudely, but not inaccurately, the Prime Minister wanted office workers back at their desks to save the bottom line of pret-a-manger and its like. The onset of the high summer was also revealing of the government's mindset. Many Britons had been understandably keen to get a break. Ministers might have exhorted their fellow citizens to try a staycation this year, but they were anxious to do something to appease the lobbying from stricken airlines, airports and other tour operators. The creation of air bridges to destinations in Europe did not come with much warning to the public, and those bridges may fall down, making the gamble to book a holiday abroad this year. This has interestingly rapid easing of the lockdown was accomplished by spills within the government about which political mitigations against infection would be put in place. Michael Gove went on television to declare that masks should not be mandatory only hours before Mr. Johnson announced that mask wearing would be compulsory in shops. Muddled messages by the government has left much of the public thoroughly confused. One recent study suggests that less than half of the adults in England now understand the government guidelines. Ministers seemed completely nonchalant about that until their complacency was suddenly shaken by a series of jolting reminders that the coronavirus had not simply been wished away and the world will not be back to normal anytime soon. The fright about a resurgence of infection in parts of Europe triggered the snap imposition of new quarantine rules on restricting holidaymakers. That was followed by a sudden ban on people from different households gathering in Greater Manchester, East Lancashire, and parts of West Yorkshire. A prohibition affecting more than 4 million people that was later announced by a tweet and a video clip late in the evening, just hours before it came into effect. Chris Whitley, the chief medical officer, used his podium at Friday's news conference to make public the warnings that after the other government advisors had been privately delivering to the Prime Minister for some time. We have to be realistic about this. The idea that we can just open up everything and keep the virus under control is clearly wrong. Mr. Johnson is now saying that we should not delude ourselves and that we are not out of the woods yet. The deluded would until very recently have included him. Just a fortnight ago, he was suggesting to the nation that the crisis would be good as over by Christmas. The fear of a second wave, which is more accurate to call a second spike, is again stalking the corridors of government. One nerve shredded for the ministers is the impact of an already battered economy. Even if we avoid another national lockdown, there is a serious cost to local lockdowns. The whole whack-a-mole strategy doesn't just hurt the economic activity in the affected region, it is likely to depress the confidence of businesses and consumers greatly. By elevating anxiety across the country, many of my local businesses are hanging on by their fingertips, says one senior Tory from the West Midlands. A second wave will kill them. Companies will be reinforced in their reluctance to comply with the Prime Minister's continuing exhortations to get office workers back to their desks. Large firms, Google among them, are planning to keep their employees at home for the rest of the year. Then there's the effect on public opinion of a re-escalation in infection. Allies of the Prime Minister reported that he believes many voters will ultimately forgive the government's mistakes, numerous though they were, on the way to the epidemic. When ministers were first confronted with the novel disease, the fear swirling around number 10 is that the public will be much less tolerant of a resurgence, especially if it looks like the result of incompetence and recklessness. Hence the anxiety of Mr. Johnson in recent days to try and deflect any culpability away from himself by emphasising the infection rates are on the rise in many parts of the globe. It wasn't me that done it, Gov. The world's to blame. This may not be the cast iron alibi he is looking for, because a significant resurgence will magnify the fact that Britain remains less well equipped to deal with the virus than many other countries. There is no routine testing program for the whole population, which is credibly argued would be the most assured method to contain the virus. The limited test, trace and isolate regime to deal with outbreaks is not comprehensive, never mind the promised world-beating one that was promised, despite its over 10 billion price tag. After all the tragedies in care homes thrown to the wolves according to a series of scathing parliamentary reports, that sector continues to struggle to access adequate supplies of reliable kits. Despite the very well-known hazard that the NHS staff are more likely to contract infection, health workers are still not being regularly tested. On top of that, Britain continues to lack any serious capacity to ensure that everyone who should be quarantined is doing so. Time that ought to have been devoted to building resilience against a resurgence has instead been spent declaring civil war on the civil service and squandered on futile exercises such as trying to reopen nightclubs. The government is clearly now very worried that the virus is gaining fresh momentum. If there is a second sharp spike, Johnson has reason to fear that many of the public will clamour to have his head on it. And I've said this could definitely lead to Johnson going. I think if there is a second spike, there will be clamour to put his head on it. I tell you now, many Tory MPs are going to be absolutely savaged by their constituents, especially if they've had businesses. Many small to medium-sized businesses are barely hanging on. My own business, again, I lost my job because of the coronavirus, because we've had no income for the past almost 5-6 months. So I can't blame them. And they were just hanging on barely by a thread. There was nothing they could do. So, of course, lots of people, and it wasn't just me, other people in the company got made redundant as well. But, there's nothing that we could do. Maybe if there had been more help and protection from the Chancellor to help stop that, we might have been able to hold on at least maybe a bit longer. But, hindsight 2020 and all that. But if the Chancellor had been serious, maybe he would have prepared for a longer term that this virus might have been around, rather than the short-term sightedness that he seems to have implemented. Because remember, the furlough scheme, as of Monday, at the beginning of this month, the employers now have to start paying more of it, whereas they weren't originally. And this scheme ends in October. A lot of people have said, we've covered this before, only like a couple of weeks ago, this month and next month could see a dramatic rise in redundancies and unemployment. I will not be surprised when that happens. Because, our good old Chancellor came out and said that this should not be, unemployment should not be the price that we have to pay. Yet many areas and people are paying that price. No, myself included. So, but there you go. So please do like and share and subscribe. Like, share and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you all next time.